How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Deciduous Bonsai podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Robson of RAKUYO Bonsai. I'm a bonsai professional in Portland, Oregon, where we specialize in deciduous trees here. And I'm with my friend, a good volunteer of the garden, and moderator of the bonsai subreddit, Maciek.
Good morning.
Good morning. So today we have 5 hot takes for you, 5 juicy hot takes to kind of discuss. So I think let's just get right into it.
Let's just get right into them. So hot take number 1, tree physiology is overrated.
Tree physiology is overrated. I think tree physiology is overrated. I think, as a bonsai professional, the more that I do bonsai at a high level, the less I care about physiology. And the reason that I'm going to say that is because you do not need to know anything or hardly anything about physiology to make a really high quality bonsai. A lot of the top artists from Japan can't tell you what an auxin or a cytokinin is, or can't describe how sugars work in the vascular system of a tree. Right. They know how to make good bonsai. So it's not something that's a necessity to manufacture bonsai at the highest level.
It's interesting. One of the very first times I met Jonas Dupuy, he also kind of said a similar thing, in that if you look at all the best people in Japan that are winning all the shows, they're often just following their training. They're not really obsessing about, again, like vascular systems and things like that. And it was difficult for me to hear at the time, because I was very much into reading about how all these things work, and sort of trying to model in my head, like, what is the stress signal that causes the back budding and things like that. And it's interesting, like this many years on, I still believe that clearly that's the mechanism of how trees work. There's clearly a vast, deep science of like what the stress mechanisms are, like how trees prepare for drought, how conifers collect sugars in their xylem and things like that in the wood, and all of those things. There's clearly a lot to it, but I never hear about it talked about. I never hear it talked about in like a garden where you're training how to do the actual things that make bonsai, like laying branches down, cutting back, planning for the next cutback, measuring where the tree is at. Is it almost feels like that is its own science, right? It's its own
the
practice.
Practice of bonsai is its own thing. And I think, I was talking to, last year Peter T visited the garden, and I asked Peter, I was like, do you spend a lot of time investing or thinking about like tree physiology? And he kind of said the same thing as I said. He's like, the longer I do this, the less I care about it. And it's just, I think, for someone like in my world who's just totally obsessed with how do I make a good bonsai more quickly, physiology is just not part of that equation. It's more just kind of cause and effect. Like, does the cause of me applying this fertilizer make the tree grow better? I don't need to know the mechanism between how the tree absorbs the nutrients and all that, as long as I'm seeing that cause and effect kind of play out. But it's been fun like chatting with you, because like you know way more about physiology than I do.
Which is kind of it's weird, right? Because I'm the student, and I'm much less skillful at bonsai than you are. I get much more modest results, or have been for a long time. It takes me a long time to get there, but knowing the physiological details, reading that landmark paper that sugar demand, not auxin, is the determiner of the response to pruning and things like that. It's a 2014 paper that's like a big deal in the tree physiology world. That didn't really inform me on what was going on with my trees, or didn't inform me on the next step for bonsai. It did sometimes justify why a technique works. Like, for example, laying down branches in a pine, getting that end tip lower than the base of the branch clearly changes the balance of odds of what's going to continue growing, where the strength will come from. But it's interesting how you can explain a lot of that in very simple terms, without having to go really deep into the physiology. And the analogy that I have for myself is that I'm a computer guy, had a career in computers for a very long time, and computers are based on quantum physics. But if you talk to a software programmer, they're never going to invoke quantum physics in order to explain like why a particular algorithm works or something like
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
So similarly, like woodworkers, maybe they don't think too much about like
How dendrochronology
how dendrochronology works or things
Yeah.
like that. So clearly, there's an underlying mechanism to what we do, but
Yeah.
it doesn't drive the artfulness of it.
I think yeah, it doesn't drive the actual result. I think it can be nice, and like I think in your case too, it can be enlightening to know the science behind why something happens the way it does.
It's an enrichment of my bonsai experience.
It's an enrichment, but it's not. It has nothing to do with the end result of actually making a good tree.
Right, and I would say also there's an interesting thing there in that some of the methods that clearly work have not been explained yet. And I think I think Ryan Neal said this quite a few times, in that like nobody in the academic world, save for just a couple of academic papers out there, has actually studied bonsai.
Yeah, very few,
right?
and they're
which is still even different from hedge pruning and things like that, which have been studied a little bit. Right?
Yeah, I think what happens in a bonsai pot is so different than what happens in a garden or a forest or basically anything else. That like, for one, a lot of the science just doesn't relate, just because the tree soil of a maple forest in Vermont, has nothing to do with what we're growing a Japanese maple in Akadama. And like, it's in no way related whatsoever. Once you get something in a bonsai pot, kind of everything changes. So for one, like, there's a lot of science that's probably not applicable to bonsai, just because it's in a very different context.
Or it rhymes, or it's adjacent, but it doesn't give you the it doesn't give you the reason why something happened in your tree when you did X, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of like in the sort of neighborhood of issues, or of driving sort of elements. But I keep coming back to this thing that I hear you say a lot in this garden, which is just make it beautiful. Yeah. And it is astonishing to me, especially having become such a tree physiology nerd, it's astonishing to me how much just make it beautiful can actually explain a lot of things, as long as the order of operations is relatively legit. Yeah. Right? Maybe if you do it all in the wrong order of operations, and maybe if you haven't been too exposed to general bonsai practices, just make it beautiful will get you into a bad place. But once you have ingested, absorbed some of the practices from people around you in the bonsai scene, just make it beautiful gets you really, really far.
Gets you really, really far. And that's like what I kind of said when we brought this whole topic up, is like, a lot of my heroes in bonsai, I don't think know a lot of the physiology that's behind all the trees, but they found a way to use what they do know. Like, if I do this, then this happens. They found a way to use what they do know to make things that just absolutely blew me away visually. And so that's what I'm concerned about, is like, what is gonna give me the best result? And if I need to know science to achieve that, then I'm gonna invest a lot in that.
Yeah. But sometimes you have evoked science when it does prove something about, say, soil chemistry or how a fertilizer works or whatever. But once we have that underlying reason, it doesn't need to be evoked all the time, every day we do things. We can just say, well, we know that fertilizer works in these ratios.
Yeah. Like we've referenced Linda Chalker Scott at either Washington State or University of Washington, and she has a great horticultural myths website. And so like, I can read her analysis on why foliar feeding isn't going to work in 99% of cases, and just kind of, okay, so now I don't need to foliar feed my pines, and I can feel just fine about that.
Yeah. And certainly someone might come along and say, well, it's because the stomata are closed anyway, or that the pressure never works out to actually take in any liquid into those stomata or anything like that. Yeah. Sure, but at some point you have to ask yourself whether you're doing bonsai or you're like scientifically recording bonsai for other people. And I think those niches within the scene do exist and should exist, and those people are adding a lot of richness to our lives. But at the end of the day, the techniques are monkey see, monkey do.
Well, and I think
I watch you do something, I copy it, and I get this.
And that's like, results should be the ultimate goal. Like if you're looking for a teacher, like, don't, just because they can say 10 physiological words that you've never heard of before and kind of sound impressive, don't follow that. Like, listen to them because they make good trees, and you like the tree, you respond emotionally to their trees. I think there are a lot of bonsai teachers who use kind of physiology as a crutch to lift up everything else, and they'll say a lot of complicated things to kind of differentiate teacher and student. And,
right.
and
But
whatnot.
what are students getting out of it?
Yeah, if a student at the end of the day still doesn't know like where to prune, where to make the scissor cut on the beach extension, then none of that science jargon is helpful. So
I've rationalized that on behalf of other teachers sometimes as a result of sort of like Western stubbornness, Western individualistic stubbornness in like that I need to have a justification for why this works to trust the teacher telling me that this works, that you
there
should
is
cut it
that.
this way.
There is
I think
that.
there's a bit of that, and I would say I am absolutely 100% one of the people who kind of was that way. But then over time, just from a practical point of view, I just have to get around to the topic of actually making nice trees.
Yeah.
And that focus requires putting away the science books and just like being in the garden. And
it's more
having
about
hands-on
practice
experience.
than it is textbook kind of knowledge.
Yeah. It's kind of like, well, you went to university for music, right? How much of your musical study talked about like Fourier transform and overtones and harmonic series and the mathematics of waves,
Pretty much none of it.
Pretty much none of it, right? But like, if I talk to you about harmonics, even though it's a very, very physics-based topic, like you understand what I mean by harmonics and kind of having certain timbres and things like that. So every artistic field is very closely adjacent to some kind of science, even painting. Right?
Like painting or like chefs, I'm sure. Like I don't think Thomas Keller of French Laundry really cares about how like the cells of your taste buds process this flavor or this flavor. He just knows how to make great flavor.
Yeah, the food science people at like a big corporate place, they might care. Because,
if you're Cheez-Its and you're trying to design people to buy your product off the shelf more than maybe you care.
I know that
about
McDonald's has some like food science.
100%. But like if you're just like a 3 Michelin star chef, you don't care about that. You just want to like, what do I need to do to make it taste good and look good?
Right. So it makes sense to me that some of the people who are horticulturally adjacent that bleed into this scene also bring some of that. We do things at scale, therefore we need to do the science mindset. But like at the end of the day, if you're working in bonsai, like you're spending a lot of time with one tree, and it's not really a data set. It's not really a big thing. It's just that one thing.
It's that one thing, and there's some very practical, non-sciencey things that you can probably do to make it better. So I don't want to like, with this hot take, I don't want to make it sound like science isn't important. It just shouldn't be like the number one driving factor.
It's overrated, not useless.
It's overrated, not useless,
Okay.
So our next hot take of the day
Keep them coming.
Stop collecting bonsai.
Stop collecting.
Stop collecting.
Collecting bonsai.
Yeah. So what does it mean to collect bonsai?
We could draw an analogy to some other scenes out there of collecting things. You talk about watches quite a bit.
Like in the watch community, like people say like you need to have a chronograph, you need to have a GMT, you need to have a dive watch, you need to have a dress watch.
Every hobby scene is like this, right?
Every hobby scene.
The 5 whatevers that every collector should have to complete their collection.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of collecting we mean, right?
Yeah, and in bonsai, like I've seen this be the detriment of a lot of collections is someone says, oh, I need to have a black pine just because you're supposed to have a black pine if you do bonsai. So maybe I can't find a good one. I just buy the best thing I can and it's not a very good tree. And so you end up with this very subpar, barely mediocre kind of pine just to check that box in the collection.
Or you have that tree for a few years, but you're not really giving the attention to it.
Maybe you don't even like black pine work. You hate the decandling process. Maybe you live in a climate where black pine aren't ideal, but you checked the box.
Or you get 5 to 7 years into your hobby and you realize like a lot of species are in and of themselves entire galaxies of topics and subtopics of their own. Like black pine, you could just grow nothing but black pine. You could grow nothing but Japanese maple.
Yeah, I think it would be like I would love to see more people having more focus with their collections because when I do a ton of travel. I probably am on the road 100 to 150 days a year at least. And all of my travels, like I see people trying to have so much diversity that it's hurting them more than helping them.
Right. The classic sort of like 150 to 200 tree collection.
And it's like, again, it's just checking boxes. Like, I need to check the Japanese maple box. And if you like Japanese maples, you got to have a Shishigashira and you got to have an Arakawa.
If you're listening to this channel, then you care about quality, right?
Yeah, and so what I was taught to do from my teacher Michael, and he was very, very strict with me about it, is don't collect species, collect quality. And so like it didn't matter like if it was a species that you were trying to get or not. It was like, you know, is it to the quality level where it can kind of enter the garden gate and be acceptable for what your goals are? And my goals at the time, I had just seen the Arzens Cup. I realized I didn't have a tree good enough in my collection to get into if there was going to be a second Arzens Cup. And that was just like a huge kind of temperature check for me. Like it was like, wait a minute, like, and this was back in 2015. I was like, what am I doing here with my collecting? Like I've been on the wrong pathway. And so that really kind of kicked me in the gut. And
it must have been a bit sobering, right? To
super sobering. Because when I did my apprenticeship with Michael, the rule was like you couldn't, like I couldn't bring certain trees into the garden unless they were a certain quality level. He was very, very strict about that.
Yeah. I don't know if I probably mentioned it even on the podcast before, but my first day at Hagedorn's garden was that lesson. That you don't keep anything below a 5.
Oh, the tree ranking
or below
lesson?
a 6 even, right?
Yeah.
And you go around the garden and rank, and that's such an eye-opener.
Yeah.
So that's one way to think about it, right? To avoid the collection syndrome.
Yeah, I think another way to think about it is
Passion.
collect your passion. Yeah. If you hate wiring and you hate like touching a tree and having it like cause pain on your hands, like don't have like San Jose junipers, don't have pines or needle junipers. If you hate wiring, don't have a lot of conifers in general because, you know, not all conifer work is wiring, but most of it is wiring and unwiring. Not all deciduous work is scissor work, but most of it is cutting things with a pair of scissors. And so like you can really tailor your collection towards the interests that you have in bonsai. If you really, really enjoy wiring, have a lot of conifers because they're going to need wire on them for the majority of their lifespan as a bonsai.
Yeah, a sort of the negative way to say what we're saying is stop collecting bonsai, but then the positive way would be to say, the flip would be to say something like, grow what you love, what feels easy, what flows out of you naturally, artistically, what gives you results.
Yeah, and you don't have to do what everybody else does. Just because everybody else, there's no obligation. If you love ginkgo, you could have 50 ginkgo in your collection, and I would personally get much more interest.
We would
going.
Visit.
I would visit.
Yeah.
I would go to the person who has 50 ginkgo in their backyard way more excitingly than I would to the person who just has like a mediocre kind of one of everything checklist.
And they're struggling with half of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I've definitely had that cycle of sobering up about certain species, but then also like every year reveals how certain species I can lean more into them. They draw me more in. Japanese snowbell's a good example where it's like
Styrax is great.
I might be struggling with some other deciduous species in my grow space, but Styrax keeps giving me beautiful results, does well in my grow space, does well in the super strong sun exposure I have, you know, doesn't run out of water as easily, all these things.
That's another layer to this is also like, don't have a black pine just because you need a black pine. Like if you live in Texas, black pine's probably not a good idea. So like get more things that are going to thrive in your climate as well. So it's not just choosing things that you have passion for, that you have interest in. It's things that are going to work well for you and align with kind of what you enjoy doing in bonsai.
Yeah. If you turn this into a collecting hobby, kind of like some other hobbies have this, you know, you have to have 10 of this, you have to have 5 of those, you have to create the perfect...
Every hobby has their list,
3 Porsche 911s, you know, that every Porsche fan should have.
Porsche 911 is the Porsche to have if you're
granted, but if you pursue this hobby that way, it can be a really rotten feeling like 5 years later when you're inundated with all this material and you also feel guilty about getting rid of it, right?
Yeah, you should really focus on what you love, enjoy, and what grows well.
So if there's any way you collect, you should collect with a lot of intention.
Yeah, just don't collect just because, you know, you might look at my yard and say, oh, there's a Coralopsis there. You don't need a Coralopsis just because I have one. Right. You should get one if you love the plant and like the workload and it grows well in your climate and whatnot. But you don't need to have one on your bench just because someone else does.
Yeah.
So follow your passion, follow what grows well for you, and
stop collecting.
Stop collecting bonsai.
Just for collection's sake, at least.
For collection's sake.
You can go out and dig trees out of the mountains if you want.
Yeah. All right.
Next.
Our next hot take.
This is a really hot one, I think.
All right, you want to introduce this one?
Yeah, not every tree can become a great bonsai. And I will say, I have seen...
I feel the comment section kind of filling up right now.
Keyboard warriors are they're getting trigger finger from hammering their keyboards so hard. But I've seen even Kimura in Tokyo talking to a room full of beginners. Any tree could become a bonsai.
Yeah.
But I think, or a great bonsai, any material. But I think that there are some asterisks to that, like why he's able to say that, maybe in Japan.
Yeah.
And that maybe it's not true for everybody everywhere, with every species, with every piece of material you might find at a nursery.
I don't
there
think
are limits, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's true for everybody everywhere with every species, with every plant. Yeah, so not every tree can be a bonsai. I think material selection is the number one thing that determines a good collection from a bad collection. And it's the number one thing that doesn't get talked about enough in bonsai teaching and training. And I'm as guilty of this myself as a teacher than anyone.
And both of us had spent some time studying with Michael Hagedorn, who does have this whole theme of, this is a trouble tree, or this is a challenge tree.
Yeah.
You recognize that term? Where he says, and I've actually heard you say...
It's just a nice way of saying it's a bad tree.
But you've said a similar thing sometimes with, say, a Talparian maple or something that we've had in the past, where it's like, this is a challenge tree. Like, maybe if we put enough brilliance into it, we can rescue it, fix the flaws, and then turn it into a great tree.
Yeah.
Those cases do exist.
Yeah.
But...
Yeah, it's a tricky topic because it depends on, like, what are your goals in bonsai? Like, if your goal is to have trees that can get into a Kokofu or the Pacific Bonsai Expo, then material selection is really important, because there's just some trunks, no matter how nicely you do the design and the branch work and quality, like you can take a bad trunk and totally make the best tree out of it possible. Yep. But if you still a bad trunk at the end of the day, it's probably not going to get past the jury to get into the Pacific Bonsai Expo or to get into a Kokofu. Versus good work on a good trunk will always get you in the door. And so, like, part of this equation is, like, it's more relevant for the older tree that we have in front of us. If you have a seedling, a seedling kind of has infinite potential. Like, it can be the greatest tree in the world, it can be the worst tree in the world. It's kind of undecided.
Yeah, and then in that case, it's kind of make sure that every year doesn't add flaws. You only add good information to it, exercise, and then you're golden, right, from that perspective.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of time, so there's a trade-off there.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of skill. And it almost takes, I think it takes a lot more skill to grow something young than it does to work on something old that has... Because you need to know a lot from that beginning, otherwise you are going to build mistakes into that plant, and the quality is going to start getting determined the older it gets with more mistakes built in. So, but if you have an older piece of material, like Japanese maples, for example, we like having trunks that have relatively few scars. We like having trunks that have very elegant movement. Japanese,
to speak nothing of the grafts that we find at nurseries, right?
Yeah,
Which is what a lot of people will start with. Right?
Yeah. We don't want to see big bulges where a graft is. We want to have really nice roots, a nice nabari, a set of surface roots. So just by saying Japanese maple, like, all these things come into our mind of what a Japanese maple is that we expect. It's just similar with dogs. Like, when I say golden retriever, you think of a certain color, you think of a head shape, you think of a fur characteristics. Yes, behavior. Same with bonsai. And so if you have a golden retriever that's black, and that's like the size of a pug, well, that's not really, that's kind of outside of what we think of a golden retriever, and maybe that plant is going to get into the expo.
Yeah, the dog show people would have trouble classifying.
Yeah.
But there's similar, I've seen, as I follow cat fancy a little bit, like a cat shows. I'm into cats. And it's the same thing. They're out there with a measuring stick. They're checking the jaw and everything, the eyes, the positioning of everything, and the color points on the ears.
Yeah, and like it or not, that's kind of how bonsai are evaluated. When you say juniper, when you say maple, like, all of a sudden a lot of things come into our head when you say those things.
It's culturally evocative, right?
Yeah. And the more your tree checks the boxes of what we expect for a nice Japanese maple, the easier it is to get into the expo. And if you have a Japanese maple that doesn't have good nabari, that has a huge kind of scar on the lower center of the trunk that has really weird movement, that might not be a tree that can become a great bonsai. Now, I'll say the flip side of this topic of not every tree can be a great bonsai is, The thing that I love about deciduous bonsai in particular is that, yes, if you give me the most horrible Japanese maple in the world, I probably can't make that into an Expo tree, but I can probably hit the reset button somewhere on that tree.
There's a subset of it
Even if I just take a finger-sized branch and air layer that off, I could air layer that off, grow a new tree, and grow that into an Expo or Kokufu quality tree.
So I guess to a degree, some of this discussion is kind of bounded by this idea of how ridiculous is it to fix what you have, or like, yes, I can fix that, but only by taking a small cutting of it, or it's very different from, that could be a great tree. It's garbage right now, but that could be a great tree. If all we do is ground layer it.
There might be a little sliver of this over here that could be great, or like, let's say you have a super garbage tree and you lean into the garbage-esque-ness of it and you pot it in a piece of metal tire that you salvage from an auto yard and you ship it to outer space and photograph it in space. That is probably going to be a piece of art that gets a lot of attention. And so you can do a lot of things.
That might have its own art merit too.
It might have its own art merit, but it's still not going to be a tree that gets into the kokufu at the end of the day. So you can put lipstick on a pig, but
be realistic.
Be realistic.
And some fixes, I guess you could talk about this a little bit. Some fixes that could be done to material might just be such a lengthy exercise. I'm talking about like serious trunk deficiencies on a maple.
You know, really when you're buying bonsai, you need to be buying the trunk. Like if you're buying something that already has some age there, if the trunk has some flaws, that is the hardest thing to fix. And so you can fix bad branches pretty easily, but fixing a bad trunk, that's really what we mean when we say every tree can't become a bonsai, is really we're saying every trunk can't become a great bonsai. Because there are trunks out there that have just gotten so flawed that there's no way to really fix it unless you air layer branch off or do some of the other things that we talked about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. Over in conifer land, it's kind of same thing where it's like
the same thing in conifer
with
land.
Juniper, it's like all I need is a beautiful line. Because I could start the tree on the end of that line, whereas in a lot of beginner contexts, it's worrying about making sure I have branches where I need them. Yeah. But with Juniper, all I need is a line, you know. And I guess in theory, the same thing is true for deciduous, because if you do have that beautiful line, you can put branches wherever you want them later, for the most part. Yeah. Right? And
I think we're getting to the point now in bonsai where the level is getting so much better kind of across all the different levels that, you know, the expectation these days should be that even if you have a trunk that's not fantastic, you should have a good design on that mediocre trunk. You should have good branching on that mediocre trunk. Like,
try your best to fix a tree anyway.
Yeah, any tree that's in front of you, you should be putting your best effort towards. Right. But not every tree that's in front of you is a tree that's gonna get to one of these high-level shows. Yeah. And perform well in one of these high-level shows. So it all comes back at the end of the day to the quality of the trunk. And it's still like judging isn't perfect yet. We still haven't identified these things. You know, in the last Pacific Bonsai Expo, one of the best trunks in the room didn't win a prize. It was a Korean hornbeam from Lindsay Shiba. A different Korean hornbeam, which I think had a much more flawed trunk, won a prize because the branch work was so much better on that tree.
Like a really beautiful canopy.
Yeah, it had amazing branch work on a trunk that I thought was kind of subpar, versus this other trunk in the room had a much more unique, interesting trunk. It just didn't have the level of kind of branch work there. And so, like, again, like, it's not kind of, these things aren't perfectly realized in the
Everybody's
real world.
Working with whatever they can get from their supply chain of wood.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, like, you're not gonna fix a bad trunk pretty easily. And so, and if your goals are to do more higher level things with bonsai, like get into a Kokufu, get into a Pacific Bonsai Expo, get into the trophy in Europe, then, you know, the trunk is kind of one of the most important parts in that process, and then doing good work once you have that good starting point.
I really resonate with this idea of like a highly imperfect trunk, but you're really doing good work on it, because like you're starting to learn really high level skills at this garden that you're helping out at, but you still have this very imperfect trunk, and then one day you're like, man, really, really beautiful branches, but I really kind of can't do anything about that trunk. So I'm just going to blow away this.
Well, and sometimes we're still in a world where like not everything's perfect. So like you could there's still cases where even in the Expo where a mediocre trunk with really, really good branch work can still win a prize. Like I hope that there's a day in the future where that doesn't happen. Right. But like we're still in a time where that can. And when you're giving prizes out at a show, like the only thing that matters is what else is in the room. And if like there's worse stuff in the room, then you know it doesn't matter. You could have a mediocre trunk with amazing work and still perform well.
So give it your absolute best shot in terms of quality work once you have material, but also be sober and realistic about what you're looking at, because eventually you might have put so much work into something that is actually kind of like staring at you every day.
It might have a cap somewhere.
Yeah, it might have a cap.
It might be hard to go beyond that.
And it might not be easily hidden. Like those flaws might be staring everybody else in the face, even though you have personally accepted them.
It's almost like technique. I mean, and it's not that there isn't technique in building a good trunk, but like material selection, I think is weighted as equally as the work that you do on the tree. And in fact, I would argue, and I think what we see in Japan happening in the past with shows is they care a lot more about the trunk than they do the work sometimes. Oftentimes, you know, if you have a tree that's a mediocre trunk with good work and a amazing trunk with mediocre work, the amazing trunks in Japan is historically always going to perform better than the tree that has really clean, good work.
Especially as age goes up, because I think the really amazing trunks that are also aged, sometimes what really actually brings it together for me in those cases, like in the Kokufu or other Japanese albums, is just letting the tree be a little loose. So all that information from years of bonsai is in there, material selection, everything else, but the tree is now loose. And when I first started out, I was like, they're doing bad work. But now I kind of understand, no, that the tree is being allowed to kind of just grow a little bit, especially prevalent in like pines and things like that.
I think you learn to appreciate, like the work is something, it's important, but like to a degree, you can teach anybody to do good work. But something like a really good trunk is just inherently 100 times more rare than finding good work out in the wild. And so I think that's why the more mature connoisseurs of bonsai will always appreciate the trunk over the work. Moving on to our fourth hot take of the episode.
Stop restyling. Stop restyling.
It's a complaint that I have.
What does that even mean?
A lot. Yeah. Stop restyling. It's something that Michael Hagedorn, my teacher, taught me. And it's something I never really thought about until I heard him say it. But after he told me this, I just see it almost everywhere now. And it's the mistake that a lot of people make, professionals included, I think, is every single time they style a tree, they take it back to the level of branches and everything that it had in its first styling. It doesn't matter if it's the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th time you've worked on it, you cut all the branches off, and it's like every single time you work on the tree, it's a first styling again. And no development, nothing is kind of retained.
Right. And Michael Hagedorn also often teaches this idea of adding information. And if you think about it, a total restyling actually destroys the information you put it in before, and then you're just adding roughly the same information that you added the first styling, you know. And one telltale thing, or I'll say it this way, often I've come over here to this garden and worked on trees where the scope of wiring is actually closer to the outside of the shell of the canopy, and the inside, we're done that part. And maybe what we're doing is adjusting it through
some guy wires to just kind of move location, but the shape of the branch is already set.
And with conifers, I think it's very tempting to restyle because the branches are bendy for a very long time.
And it's not that like a tree can't ever get overgrown and needs to be reset. Like that's definitely a thing. But the mistake that I see so often is like someone who's gotten a lot of nice ramification and started to build some quality, and it's when like the before picture looks worse than the after picture. Or sorry, I think I mixed that up.
The after picture looks
worse. Looks worse than the before picture. And I'm seeing this a lot.
But you would concede that there is a little bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and when you have to clean a tree.
And that's always a part of bonsai, right? But what we're saying is like every single time a tree is designed, a new front has to be chosen, and then like
new angle.
New angle. All the branches need to be cut off. Like the canopy needs to be totally rethought, and that's just not the case with high level bonsai. The high level bonsai is you do the first styling once. And then you evolve off that first styling, all the iterations that come after that.
Right.
And so
that's not to say that you shouldn't reconsider these factors. I mean, here you have a phrase that we often say at this garden, which is like everything is always up for debate. Mm-hmm. So in theory, we could reset any given aspect of the tree.
Yeah, if you find a better front on one of my trees than I ever saw or thought, like, I want to hear about it. Don't stay quiet. But if I can still argue that the current front is the better front, then we're going to keep trying to evolve that rather than cut off all the branches to make the other one work.
Appreciate what you're inheriting from a tree, from previous work or for previous owners. Try to continue with it if you can.
Yeah, and try and, something else that I say a lot is don't cut a branch off unless you absolutely need to. Like you can prune things back, that's always fine, but never prune branches off unless you need to. Always try and retain more than what you had the last time you worked on the tree.
That could be its own hot take even, because I think that there's
branches off.
There's a fear of bar branches. There's a very strong fear of bar branches and inverse taper out there.
Well, I mean, something that Michael always told me, and I think it's every time I go to Japan and see trees there, I see this, is density trumps rules. It's more important to have a dense tree than it is to have a tree without bar branches. It's more important to have a dense tree than it is to have a tree with a slight reverse taper. It's more like density is what makes a tree feel like it has age and maturity. When a tree has no branches, or when a tree has a first styling done to it, it looks incredibly young and youthful to me, and that there's no age, maturity, complexity, any of that kind of present. And so that's, I think, when we retain density and find a way to artfully use density, that's where trees start to really feel mature and old and like they've been in training for some time. So yeah, I guess our hot take is just you don't feel the need to take it back to zero every single time you touch it.
Do you think that one sort of antidote for constant restyling is to keep your eye on the ball of refinement in terms of branching or just ramification? If you are single-minded about ramification and branch making, then in theory, restyling is kind of the opposite of what you're focused on, right? In theory.
In theory, yes. I think part of the issue that leads to someone needing to do a first styling every time they restyle or wire their tree is that they don't do the first styling correctly. And something else that Michael taught me, kind of going along with this, is that if your eventual silhouette needs to be here, then your first styling should be in here so that you can grow out to where you need to be. And what the mistake that I think so many people make, I see this with Yamadori conifers every day on Instagram, is someone styles the tree in the first styling to be the profile that they want it to eventually be, and then there's nowhere for that tree to develop. So every single time they
need to keep compressing.
They need to need to cut all the branches off and start over, because the first time they styled it, it was in the perfect silhouette and there was no room for it to grow. And so the way that we did first stylings at Michael's, which I'm incredibly thankful that I learned this lesson for, was that you style it about 33%, about 1/3 of the way in from where you actually want it to be, so you have somewhere to actually grow and develop.
Hence the focus on compression, I guess, right? On sort of Suzuki and
the same is true for deciduous trees too. Like if you want the tree to be here, you need to be, or like if you're doing a hard pruning, for example, you need to prune it back much farther back than where you actually want it to grow out, because you need to account for the several years of new growth that you're coming back from. So
you got to think a few steps ahead. You got to know that the tree will give you up for free.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing that's similar in that, like here, we often, on earlier stage projects, we're often pulling branches down because those will have to be those heavy branches, right? And that we'll get our upward billowing growth later from the rest of it for free from the tree, but we have to think a few steps ahead to bring it down. And if we've done that, then later on we're not restyling those branches. They're already where we needed them.
Yes.
Whereas in real life, a full-size adult tree has to keep growing and slowly weighing those branches down.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think we're simulating reality on time lapse.
As we talked about with the science part, like what happens in real life and a bonsai pot are just
a little bit different, right? To
totally
get to the
different.
same, to get to similar aesthetics.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of air involved in the typical styling is what leads to every tree being reset during a restyling. But
maybe there's a good episode in that actually.
There's probably there's probably a whole episode in that topic in particular. But the hot take for today is don't do a full restyling every single time you touch your tree, because you're never gaining any progress.
And prevent yourself from getting into that quandary in the first place by when you do that first styling.
Yeah, try and make it sustainable. Yeah. Like try and make it something that you can build off of. Like compact your silhouette much more than you need to. Mm-hmm. Stop restyling your bonsai.
I like that one.
And then our last hot take of the day, we're gonna make some pottery heads explode here. Feel free, good comments, bad comments, we love them all. Drop
Bring
them
it
in the
on.
comment section.
Flame suit on.
Yeah. We've been on Reddit. We know how to deal with comment trolls. But our last take of the day is pots don't matter as much as you think they do.
Yep.
Why don't pots matter?
That's a deep one. I think I'm ahead of the curve on this because I'm not really a big pottery guy.
You're not a pottery guy.
I'm more of like does it have the right volume for the stage of work I'm doing? Does it have the right characteristics? And what am I doing with the roots?
So what I see happening so much in the bonsai community is people get so obsessed with the collectability of pots that they lose track of the important thing is this a good size and shape for the tree to begin with? And most of the times I'm seeing, the size and the shape and glaze or whatever might be totally wrong for the tree, but this is a 5th generation Yamaki with a coin stamp, and it's got this collectability factor.
Or it's a really short run Sarah Rayner.
It's a porcelain Sarah Rayner that she was only doing 30 years ago in a span of 6 months or whatever.
Or it's a Hagedorn pot, which is quite rare.
It's a Hagedorn pot, but that Hagedorn pot, while it might be a really great object and collectible object in its own right, might be terrible for the tree that you potted it in. So stop using collectible pots just for the sake of look, as someone who evaluates bonsai professionally, I care much less about the quality of the pot as long as it's a good fit for the tree. Meaning I would rather see your tree in a beautifully well-matched modern Chinese pot, if it was the right shape, the right glaze, the right style, rather than have it be in a really funky shape or size, but it's a high quality pot. And like I say all this as someone who has a bunch of Tofukuji pots like inside a glass cabinet with a light on it inside.
And I'm looking at some pots over there that are amazing.
There's some crazy kokofu pots over here.
And also, to be fair, the display is the most important thing in bonsai, or one of the most important things in bonsai guy. So absolutely, pottery is important.
100%
but these are hot
important.
takes.
But these are hot takes. So you asked for this, we gave it to you. And the hot take is, the collectability of the pot doesn't matter at all compared to its usefulness. And if the usefulness isn't there, if it's the wrong style for the tree, if it's the wrong shape or size for the tree, what I see a lot of the time is pots are just flat out too small for bonsai. Most people are under potting their bonsai like crazy.
That could be another good episode too.
Yeah, we'll save that for repotting time of year. As pottery hot takes.
Don't forget.
But yeah, it's I don't care at all about like who made the pot, like any of that, if it's a bad pot match for the tree. And so that stuff only matters and amplifies your display if it's a good match for the tree. And most of the time I'm seeing people put more focus on the collectability of the pot rather than the usefulness of it for the specific tree they're using.
Yeah, and if you care about the collectability and the appearance of the pot that much, then and like the tree is not that good, there's a real unbalancedness to like what you're communicating with that, I think.
100%, yeah.
Right.
Like it's, and I see that all the time. Is you know, a really mediocre tree in a really expensive pot. And like, cool, you might have it in a $2,000 Tom Benda pot, but like at the end of the day, like this tree still can't get into, you know, the national show.
I do envy those nice pots.
Nice pots are nice to have, and we're not saying
Right.
that's the case.
And question to probe your values on this a little bit. Like I've got my cottonwood forest in a mica pot, a big mica pot that I think you gave it to me actually.
Yep.
And are you offended by that? Because the way I see it is, when it's time to show that, I'll just pop it into a really nice show pot.
Not at all. Because it's in the right shape and size, and so like even though it's a mica pot, like it's the right shape, the size, it's functioning well, and it has, if you squint your eyes, it has the right look for the plant. So
it's like a paper prototype for the pot that it will be in. That's the way I look at it. Right?
Yeah. I would much rather see that than have you put it in some crazy chunky tofukuji rectangle that, even though it might be a museum quality pot, it's totally wrong for the tree.
You've told me a few times of particular growers in Japan.
A few of my heroes from Japan
that are growing in boxes all the time, like wood boxes, and then when it's time, or whatever kind of boxes, and when it's time for a big show, then they go into like a $50,000 or $1 million pot.
Yeah, Ebihara was like that.
For just a few weeks.
Yeah, he'd take 20 years from an air layer to Kokufu Prize, and so like the first 18 of those 20 years, it would be growing in a wooden grow box, a $10 wooden grow box.
Now that box is obviously very carefully dimensioned,
right? Yeah, it's the right shape and depth and everything.
So it is a sort of like stand-in or prototype stunt double.
Checks the box for
a stunt double for the eventual pot.
It's a stunt double for the eventual pot. But like the pot, like he's doing that the right way, because the tree is what matters, right? And so when you have an exhibit or you're making a display, like get it in a nice container. But until then, like, you know, I could care less about a 5th generation Yamaki double stamped Koyo, whatever.
If I came in here with one of those, you'd probably be drooling, right?
Oh, I would like it in itself.
For in and of itself, yeah.
But if it's not used correctly, then it's worthless.
It's almost tragic.
So, it's more useful to just take the tree out of it and just display it at the show by itself, which they do in Japan. And I think that would actually that would enrich a lot of bonsai shows, because there are so many people out there who have nice pots in their collections that do have these special qualities to them. You don't have to put a mediocre tree in it to show off that work. You know, I would love to see more bonsai exhibits where just, you know, pots without trees in them are being celebrated. At Gafuten this year, they probably had $1 million worth of tofukuji pots, just in like little glass.
Just on their own with no trees.
Just on their own with no trees.
Yeah, perfectly cleaned.
And it was just a really treat to see, because like you can respect the good pot with its quirks, kind of.
They're like museum pieces at that point.
100% museum pieces, yeah.
I really like this guidance because it takes a little bit of the pressure off from collecting pottery. And what it means is that when I do finally look for a pot, for example, for the cottonwood forest, I can really be very intentional about it.
Yeah, don't waste your money on like don't waste $500 right now on a pot that isn't gonna work well. Like,
you don't even have a tree for.
Yeah. Save that money and that investment and buy a better trunk to begin with, or and just have it in a $10 wood box, or like, you know, like it's not where the focus, I think, should be. For my approach in bonsai, the focus is always tree first, everything else second. And so you can have a nice stand and have a nice pot, but if the tree is kind of meaningless, then none of that really matters. So I want to see, like, what Ebihara kind of focused on is so much investment in the tree, and then great, you find a good pot to put it in once it's time for that. But you don't need to spend a lot of capital up front in bonsai. In fact, I'm more impressed if I went into a bonsai collection and everything was in a box, but the trees were good quality, versus everything was mediocre quality and they were in fancy pots.
It kind of reminds me of something you've said about quality generally before, which is like, I don't care if you're just starting with seedlings. I don't care if you're starting with seedlings versus like
quality applies to all levels,
all stages, right? Where as long as the intention is very good and you're trying really hard to get it right, that's what matters.
Yeah, and it's almost funny, because I think, you know, there's definitely people at the top in bonsai do appreciate ceramics, you know, a lot. But I've noticed, like, you know, all of my heroes in bonsai, they can't tell you the differences between that 5th generation Yamaki. I keep joking on 5th generation Yamaki, but like, you know, they care less about that. It's more about the tree and how that pot's being used. And generally also, like, is this just like a well-made pot? Because there are a lot of famous potters out there. Ichiyo is one where he's a very famous potter. He has kind of some significance in like the history of bonsai ceramics, but the pots are very low quality from a ceramics standpoint. Like if someone who doesn't know bonsai ceramics but knows like their college professor of teaching ceramics and whatnot, they'll say, oh yeah, these walls are too thick or blah, blah, blah. I mean, you can objectively argue that Tofukuji pots are really sloppily made. Yeah, he's the most famous potter from Japan. Like he has a really important historical standpoint, but the technicality of the work isn't necessarily there.
On the other side of that spectrum, you've kind of shocked me and impressed me with some of the really beautiful but also insanely affordable Chinese production pots that are out there. You know, that if you need to fill that niche, you could just collect a bunch of those to kind of get by until you can afford a nice pot from now or from Sarah or from Japan.
That's what I would recommend. Is if you're not going to use a wooden grow box, like just a modern Chinese pot that, you know, the $100 version of that $600 you know, Koyo pot, where it's the same exact size, the same exact kind of shape. It's just, you know, doesn't have the collectability factor. I think you're much better spending your money on that than buying all these fancy pots. You know, fancy is great when you have the tree that deserves it and can be uplifted by it. But if your pot is better than your tree, then it's I don't know. For me, that doesn't really work too well.
I feel like the original sin that kind of leads to this, by the way, or I almost feel like we're saying stop collecting pots.
Yeah.
Like, this is like stop collecting bonsai.
Yeah.
It feels like the original sin of this is actually during repotting season, you do have to kind of have an inventory of pots in order to be able to do the matching. Whether here or at Hagedorn's or wherever, whenever we've been doing repots, it's like we're actually selecting between like 3 or 4 pots.
Yeah.
So people need to build up a collection, but they should kind of stop themselves short of going crazy.
Yeah, and buy a collection that's going to make sense for the trees that you have. This is a huge point. Like, I'm someone who likes big deciduous trees. So liking big deciduous trees, I know that I'm going to need a lot of big glazed ovals.
Big
like,
glazed trays.
I know if I get a glazed oval that's 20 plus inches, I can use it really easily in the garden.
So it's like a forest tray is a very safe investment for you.
Because I have a lot of forests.
Yeah.
Versus like, if for me to buy an unglazed rectangle, I'm going to have a much harder time using that with the trees that I have in my backyard. So I'm not going to buy that unglazed rectangle that Matawinga has at the National Show. Even though it might be great and I love it, I'm not going to buy it because I don't really have a use for that. But this glazed Koyo oval with a ginkgo stamp, like I can use that like incredibly easily. Like I can use that for 50 different trees in my yard. So
what about the case of the most super serious pot ever that has an incredible amount of history in it, and like it's very expensive and very rare, but you've got an incredibly modest tree in it? Is that okay sometimes, or is it kind of cheesy?
It's okay sometimes. I think if it's the right size and style for the tree, then it's totally okay to have the quality of the tree exceed the quality, or the quality of the pot exceed the quality of the tree, as long as the pot's a good match. So you could take, you know, a Japanese maple that's kind of mediocre, and get it in, you know, an oval pot with a lip, a shallow oval pot with a lip, and that shallow oval pot with a lip could be a Tofukuji, it could be a antique Chinese. That's totally fine, even if, you know, your maple's maybe not that great. If it's the right size and style, I love it.
Yep.
If it's a special pot, but it's not a good match for the tree, I don't like it just because it's a special pot. It's got to match the aesthetics of the tree.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it does nothing for me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just rip it out and display the pot like by itself.
Case to be made for that, I guess.
So
they're doing it.
But yeah, so like when you're buying pots, buy ones that are going to be suited for the trees that you have. Otherwise, you're just going to be sitting around with 30 pots in your garage that you can never use.
Yeah.
So yeah,
stacks of colanders.
Pots only matter. I guess the hot take is pots only matter if they're a good match for the tree. Otherwise, you just have a nice pot. And the collectability of the pots, again, it's cool, but if the tree quality is not there, it's not as cool.
Yeah, you got to pace yourself with a lot of things. This again, this is very similar to the stop collecting trees, stop collecting bonsai thing.
Yeah.
Where you got to pace yourself because you kind of realize over time what's important and what looks kind of garish to other people or what doesn't match. And it takes a while to realize some of these lessons. I mean, I'm years in, and I'm just learning some of these things now.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
Do things with intention, for sure.
Do things with intention, and put the focus on good bonsai. If your focus is on making, creating, and refining good trees, then everything else will kind of fall suit. So, hope you enjoyed this episode of 5 hot takes that we have for you on a nice, is it September? Nice August, September day.
Last day of August.
Yeah. So this is probably coming out in September. If you have any thoughts, drop those in the comment section. We always read those and are happy to hear. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button. That really does help us out. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, that also helps us out to encourage us to put out more episodes and kind of feel like these are actually doing something out in the community. So
give us your own hot takes.
Give us your own hot takes in the comment section. I want to read some of those too.
Yeah, we'll try not to ban anyone for the worst hot take.
But yeah, anyway, you've been watching RAKUYO's Deciduous Bonsai channel. This is the Deciduous Bonsai podcast. I'm Andrew.
I'm Maciek.
And we'll see you next episode.